at the center of the great forest, on an island in the sky. The crow, deer, and wolf clans have been training 3 fearsome warriors from infancy for one purpose: to protect and serve the goddess of Estra.
So how exactly are we going to do that? Protecting the goddess, I mean.
Fran lies down.
Leica can't answer because she's too busy sniffing both your butts.
Okay, back off, Wolf Clan!
This disturbs me, but not to worry, I will instantly repress it.
These are the guardians of the goddess. Leica, the tiefling paladin who hails from the wolf clan.
Nobody's touching one beautiful hair on the goddess's head as long as I'm around.
Corbin, a human druid from the crow clan.
Human! I'm a crow!
And Fran, a water genasi wizard of the deer clan.
So, is there a way to quit this job or what?
This unlikely trio will venture forth into an unfamiliar world without knowing who can be trusted against the powerful dark force stalking the steps of their goddess and threatening the future of their world. Tune in every second Monday to Dames and Dragons, a 5th edition D&D actual play podcast. See ya then!
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with game designer Christopher Gray about the great American novel, The RPG. It is a really, really awesome RPG with some really unique storytelling mechanics, and we're talking all about how to develop character arcs in RPG. So here is my conversation with Christopher Gray. Okay, everybody, now I am here with a great game designer and an awesome human, Chris Gray. Welcome to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the tabletop role-playing game industry?
Well, first of all, you're assuming I'm human.
What a shock that would be.
I'm a game designer and a prolific game player. So I actually have a bit of a problem on that front. But I think at this point I'm most known for The Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, which was a PBTA game about children's theme parks and, essentially Cthulhu. And, mixing those two worlds to create this sort of sinister, dark satirical world. So yeah, that was my my big Kickstarter this last year, and I think that's probably what most people would know me for. Although I do a lot of work with 5th edition and D&D on DM's Guild and in other categories of games, freelancing here and there.
Yeah, you're very prolific, and it's awesome to have you here because Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, right? You don't normally think about throwing children's theme parks and Cthulhu together. It's not a thing that that often comes together, but wow, does it work. So that is really, really awesome. Any nominated product, people should totally check it out. We're here today to talk about your next project. You want to hit me up a little bit, fill me in on the details of that?
Yeah, this is really exciting. It's something that I've actually been working on for quite some time. It's called the Great American Novel, a role-playing game. It's more of a framework than anything because it actually works in many different settings. But the idea of it is that you are going to play out the sort of experience you would have if you read a novel of this genre. So these are character-driven stories with character motivations, and the plot is about the characters dealing with those conflicts that get in the way of their motivations. And it's just an exciting framework because I've been able to play all kinds of stories that I really haven't had access to before because of some certain limitations of traditional role-playing games. So that Kickstarter is coming up, and we are. I say we because I have some people helping me out with this, including Alan Barr from Gallant Knight Games, who's doing the publishing and distribution, and we are on a fast track for a President's Day launch. It's coming February 18th.
So I am super duper duper excited to talk about this because we've already talked a little bit behind the scenes, and I know you're doing some things that aren't necessarily traditional in role-playing games. You've actually already alluded to that in this conversation too. Why don't we tackle some of those? Like, what is the Great American Novel about, and what are some of the things that it does atypical from your standard D&D type role-playing game?
Well, it is about a character experience. And I think that when you play role-playing games, especially traditional ones, that you are often pigeonholed into a plot experience. And what this does, and other story games do this too, except there's a bit of a difference. You know, when you think about, I like to bring up Jim Pinto's Protocol, for example, or Fiasco, or, you know, more recently, Good Society. These are games that kind of tackle that too, where they're trying to really accomplish what the character experience is. What Great American Novel does that's unique is that it actually applies a novel structure to it. So by the time you're done playing, not only have you only really cared about characters and what they want, you have completed the story. And so you kind of tie it up in a big bow at the end, and you have sort of closed the book on your novel, and you have a complete experience. And that's something that I was really trying to build into the game. You know, as sort of my take on storytelling games.
And, you know, one of the things that we decided we should really focus on here is character arcs, right? And I think that this game, you know, when we're talking about character-driven games, character arcs are a big thing that I think we miss sometimes. I think a lot of times when we sit down to play a role-playing game, some of us might have this character with this long backstory that tells us how they've already completely developed, and, you know, they are already the perfect shining example of humanity, right? And they're going to go and do everything right and be amazing because, like, they're at the end of their arc before the story we're playing through has even begun. So why do you think, like, character arcs are compelling, and how does your game help tell a compelling character arc?
Well, I mean, it's so true, isn't it? Especially with some of the traditional games when you think about Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm Argyle Brewmain, you know, and I've been in the same Scottish dwarf for 300 years, and and then nothing ever changes about Argyle, and until he gets eaten by a spider, and then that was Argyle. True story. But I always was surprised in certain situations when, even in long campaigns, when a character that you were playing would be different at the end of the campaign or the session than the character was at the beginning. And when we look at storytelling, that's one of the key ingredients is, the character must change. The beauty about Great American Novels, when you read them, many times they don't even have plots. They're just really characters meandering through their lives, dealing with this or that, but what you're not following plot. You're following that character's journey, that their rise or their fall. And so I really wanted to, in Great American Novel, make that the key metric or the key mechanic that drives a character, not achievement, not how much damage can they take, not are they able to fight well, not can they find things, not can they persuade people, and not how good are they at investigating, or all of those metrics that we use in their advancement. I don't want to look at any of that, because none of that matters if you're looking at the character's story. And so Great American Novel has a mechanic, well, really, I would call it the driving engine, is this idea that we're going to focus on the character arc. That is really the only mechanic that drives the system, where you are either rising towards some sort of wonderful conclusion, some sort of heroic end, or you're falling on your arc to some sort of tragic end, and the arc is the single metric that measures that. So your character must change throughout the story and must be different from than the character was from the beginning.
I like that a lot. I think that's really, really cool. That the arc sounds like sort of the backbone mechanic of the whole system. And you've managed to build an entire mechanical system around this idea.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't call it the backbone, because really what the backbone is conflict, what drives the arc. So I think arc is sort of a measurement, or a bellwether, or a thermostat reading of the conflict. Because conflict is what's driving you. In conflict, all that is your character wants something. Something's getting in the way of what your character wants. That's a conflict. And the adjudication of that conflict is what changes your arc. So the interesting thing about it is, and I've run this a lot of different settings with a lot of different people, and almost universally, everybody comes to the table with an idea what their character journey is going to be. They might even have a pretty good idea what their conflicts are going to be because they've set up a motivation like, oh, I don't know, I need to avenge my family. So they have this picture in their head of their character's journey of going through these conflicts in order to avenge something horrible that may have happened to their family. But what the arc changes that happen as a result of the way the game works, completely different what they had in the picture that they had in their head and how this would work out. And there have been times where there was one moment where this guy, was shot down by the local sheriff. And that was the end of his character. And he said, you know what? That is not at all what I thought was going to happen, but that is precisely what should have happened. And so the game almost engineers a scenario in which your character gets what your character deserves based upon your decisions.
It is interesting about character arcs because they do rely on this rise and fall. Some might say it's not very interesting to see characters constantly succeed, right? And that's why you need this conflict. You need things for them to either overcome or fail at. How do we tackle that in character arcs, especially when we have something big, like a big failure like death, that results in the death of a character that ends their arc, so to speak?
Yeah, you can end your arc for sure. And other games do this in certain ways. I think in some anticlimactic, terrible ways. I love 5th edition. I've been playing forever, and editions before that. Actually, second was the one I played before that. So I'm totally familiar with the idea of I am going to heroically save this person, and then you don't because you got a bad roll. There's just one particular point. I think this may have been one of the points that drove me to doing this game, and it wasn't a 5th edition game. There was this guy who was having to leave our party of like 2 years of playing this campaign, and we all loved him, but he was going to college and he had to leave. So okay, I told him offline. He's like, you know what? How do you want your character to exit? How do you want your character to leave? And he said, I really want to have this sort of. He was playing a paladin. I really wanted to have this glorious, save the party at my, and block the bullet from hitting them. I want to save the party through my death. And so I was like, okay, so great. I set up, this encounter. They were on an airship, and a Balrog comes out. So now they're fighting a Balrog, right? And I was thinking, this has got to end the way he wants, and it did because he put the landing blow on that Balrog who was catching the ship on fire. This is an airship; it's going to crash, and he pushes it off of the ship, tackling it, and he's falling, and he blows up with the demon. And it was this glorious moment. Yeah, he saved the ship. He saved the party. But D&D mechanics got in the way, and he survived the fall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there were other things that have, what we just said. He's like, you know what? No, you died. You didn't survive. You died.
There you go.
This was your horror. And I think that was sort of to make a long story short. I was like, you know what? We need to give that decision to the player. The arc does change because of adjudication of rolls. If you say there are certain moves that are only available to you if you're falling versus if you're rising. And to say you're falling and you do really well on a falling move, that means you're going to fall even more, right? So you can, by the way the dice go, your arc will change, or not. But you can also choose to pay a currency that I call plot points, which work a lot like fate points, where you can change your arc, and you can actually you have complete control if you want to use those plot points to change what you're doing. But at the end of the day, you get to decide what happens. So if your character falls as far as your character can fall, you have a choice as a player. I'm talking 4 points, right? You have fallen because of all of the moves that have happened, etc., and you cannot fall anymore. You can decide to okay, this is when I'm going to settle my character. I'm going to get hit by a train. This is the moment. Or you can keep playing. It's just you're not going to change anymore until you're finally out of the game. But if you do leave the game, now you become a game master, and you can use your plot points to affect the story in that way. And so there's sort of an out. But the game, the larger point that I'm trying to make is the game gives that power to the player. The player gets to decide, ultimately how their arc goes, ultimately how the character leaves the story. And, if there's ever a moment that they don't like what's happening, they have the power to change it.
To see that kind of thing going on, to have the power to do that, to have even the power to say, no, I want to fail, I think is really great. I think we as players don't embrace failure enough, right? That's a big thing for me, is like, I want my players to be as excited when they roll a natural 1 as they do when they roll a natural 20 in D&D, right? I want them to get that feeling of like, now I get to describe something really cool happening, even if it is at the expense of me. So I think there's great stuff like that. So how do we as GMs then, how can we help players achieve great story arcs?
Well, I think if you're not using a system that it's engineered to do this, I think what we need to do is give more power to the players. And there needs to be moments like when this paladin was falling where you just put the dice aside. You know what? You have narrative control. We see Matt Mercer do this, and I think more and more people are doing this. Where tell me what that looks like. Well, that can extend to you. You tell me how this ends. If you're playing a 3-year campaign with somebody in a traditional game and the dice determine everything, that's fine. Except that if you need to have your moment, you're robbing the player of that moment if you depend on the dice. So I think it's fine to give narrative control. And it can actually be a physical thing. It's like, you know what? I'm going to hand you my game master dice. I am transferring the power to you. You are now the game master. You tell the table how this pans out. And just giving them the freedom to do that in those moments can go a long way into creating that arc that you're looking for.
And how then does a system like the Great American Novel help you do that?
The system's engineered to exchange narrative control however you want, throughout the whole game. I mean, it's built into the system that if you have a major success, you have narrative control. You are now the game master. You decide how this resolves. You can introduce NPCs. You can introduce story elements. You now have control. You can also use your plot points to buy narrative control at a moment that you want. And what ends up happening, especially towards the end of a session, is these plot points are flying across the table because the players get so excited about the story and they've forgotten about their characters at this point. And now they're creating the story. And I, as a game master, will literally just sit back, fold my fingers, and watch, because everybody has taken control of the story and it's beautiful. And that's what the game's engineered to do. So you get used to, in the very beginning, the exchange of narrative control. That's an important thing with arc, because with character arc, you have got to have control of your character ultimately.
Very true, very true. And it makes it easy on you, right? As the GM, when you can just sit back and watch the players go nuts. You're being entertained. It's great.
Yeah, there is a danger in Great American Novel for you to be a passive game master, and I've actually had that called out on me before. And there is a mechanic in there to introduce your own NPCs and stories and all of that. But if you have a great table, there is very little work you have to do. You can just watch everybody take the story where it needs to go.
Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
Hey, it's Mike Shea of Sly Flourish and author of The Lazy Dungeon Master and Sly Flourish's Fantastic Locations. My show, The DM's Deep Dive on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, features a one-on-one discussion with guests like Sean Merwin, Enrique Bertrand, Teo Sabadia, and more. Once a month, we dive deep into a single D&D topic and answer your burning DM questions. Watch us live on Twitch, on YouTube, or on our podcast on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Let's dive deep.
All right, back to the show.
Let's talk a little bit more about how players can help each other achieve great arcs, right? Like, how do we as player characters support other player characters to have great moments along their journey and great rises and falls?
I think it's a two-parter. The number one thing that players can do is to have a picture of what an arc looks like. If you go into the game with Argyle Broodmane, and all Argyle's ever done is what Argyle does. How can Argyle change? Maybe he doesn't be the brutish dwarf. Maybe he goes on a journey and he finds love, and he stops being so crass, and starts washing his beard. What kind of changes can you? I think you need to picture how your character can change. The second part is that I think other players need to be very generous with spotlight. we tend to just, here's my character's moment. I'm going to run with my character. And then you can bulldoze over what other people are doing. And if you're sitting at, say, an organized play table, in a situation that's very structured, it's very difficult for the dungeon master in that case to control spotlight. But players can. They can sit back and say, okay, you know what? I want to see what Argyle does in this moment. I'm not going to do the thing that I could do. And being a generous player, I've seen wonderful things come out of the story just because another player was given the opportunity to shine.
I think we can do a lot more as players, exactly like you said. And I think when we think about other players, it's great. You know what I mean? Like it's almost that idea of like, as you get older and as you become an adult, it's more exciting to give a gift than it is to get a gift. I find the same is true playing games, right? It's so exciting to be like, wow, look how I set this up. And now this person is having a great time doing what they do best. That's definitely a huge, huge thing to consider. And I'm a pretty dominant player at the table, right? I like it.
No, no, that's not true.
It is, right? Like, and I think it's true of many game designers. We like role-playing games so much. We have these big personalities. We get in there, we're acting, we're doing all this stuff. We got to remember to share the spotlight. It makes our own play experience more exciting when we do that.
And what happens if you are running an Argyle Brewmain and you do step back? That's almost an arc in of itself, that your big, bold character that plays bagpipes, this character must exist, that is always noisy and getting in the way. So it's a moment when Argyle doesn't. And lets the the shy wizard step forward and have a moment, and then that gives a presence to it. So yeah, you can tee up moments as a player for other players to take.
So how can NPCs have great arcs, right? Should they? Do they need great arcs? I often think about how in our television and movie history these days, a lot of us talk about how great villains are, right? And in the Marvel Netflix shows, we have these flashbacks to see how Kingpin became the Kingpin, and he's different from the first episode than he is from the last episode. Like, is it a good idea to have NPCs that have incredible arcs and not just villains, right? The patron of the adventurers, as it were, or the people they meet along the way. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's obviously your minor NPCs that you probably don't want to put this amount of effort into, or if it's always harder with a one shot because then you really aren't working with a lot. But certainly on a campaign, I think that it's almost a responsibility to make NPCs have more texture. And I think I found that one of the best ways to generate an arc or a change in the character as an NPC is to understand what they want. If we start thinking about our NPCs not as what can they do, but what do they want, things become a lot more clear and they become more enriched and textured. I'm thinking of one example where there was inevitably, especially in a D&D game, you have your potions vendor that becomes the most important NPC in the game by the end of the campaign, right? It was a throwaway character. I even named him Alistair Hole, so my campaign called him A-Hole, Mr. Hole.
That's great.
So it was supposed to be it, but he became a huge, important character. And I think it was because I was looking at what he wanted. And it turns out he was a dragon all along, and he was sick of hoarding and found out his joy in, bartering instead. And so this was, but just because I knew that and what I wanted, what he wanted, I was able to apply a lot of texture, and by the end of the campaign, he was a very big deal to the characters. And I think it's not always easy. And actually, I cheat a lot. I will go into random like Donjon and Dungeon, whatever that site is, and I'll find random traits and things like that I can just infuse into an NPC just so that they have more dimension. But to take it one step further, to give them an arc, what do they want, and what's getting in the way of what they want? If you know those two things, you have an arc.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Great American Novel. So who else is working on this game with you? What artists do we have? What other folks are you excited to work with on this?
This is great. I'm first of all very excited that Gallant Knight picked up the game. I met Alan Barr a little while ago, and he's such a great guy. He puts out such great products. He's probably most known for Tiny D6 with Tiny Dungeon and that line. But he's really invested in these sort of independent games that are trying to change and innovate. And so he's picking up the publishing, which is great because, I'd like to create, not publish.
Right. I feel that.
So I'm working with them. Yeah. You can only do one, right? Now, he manages to do both. But anyway, I do have, I'm also very excited that Robert Hebert, who was the artist for the interior design of Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, is doing the art for this.
Oh, cool.
He is an amazing artist. He's an amazing friend, and he's already punched out some great art, which you'll see on the Kickstarter. And so he's on board, and that's great. Also, Chris Nizak from Mr. Etted Mark.
I love Chris Nizak.
I tapped him because I happen to know from his podcast that he's he has a master's in creative writing, and I also, having listened to his podcast, know how good he is at mechanics. So he's doing the developmental edit on it, and that's amazing. I know that the system's going to be great because he's working on it.
Yeah.
Very excited about that.
That's really cool.
Also, Lauren Mcmahon, she did the editing for Good Society. Fraser Simon's The Veil. She's very embedded in the Gauntlet and does their Codex zine that they put out. So she's going to be editing it, and I'm thrilled to have her on board, especially because she's run the game on the Gauntlet, and it was terrifying to watch, but she did an excellent job.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the name of your RPG, The Great American Novel. So why did you choose the name?
The idea came before the name, which was I needed a framework that created literary experiences. In other words, the kind of feeling you have when you read a novel. And what better genre than to just go after the Great American Novel? Because if it can work there, it can work anywhere. And James, I got to tell you, it has. I have run this framework on everything from 1940s Los Angeles to The Godfather. I've run it as Fargo, the movie. I've run True Blood most recently. And it works in all of the... If you can think of a story, a movie, a novel, or anything, a television show that is focused on characters and their motivations, this will work for it.
Wow. So what kind of stuff have you done with the system? Let's get specific.
Yeah, I've gotten pretty far with it. One interesting experiment was The Shining. And it was sort of on a lark. What I ended up doing, the reason I started doing it this way was because when I was going to cons and you have the choice to play all of these games, the last one you want to play is the one about, the Dust Bowl, where you have to, cross the United States and deal with all these emotional... And so I've had trouble filling the slot. That doesn't mean that I don't think it's, something people want to play. It's just not something you want to play at a con. So I started putting trappings on it, and I realized that it worked in all of these different trappings. And so I was really pushing the envelope to see if it would work with The Shining. And it did. And we did this at Crit Hit in Phoenix, which is this tiny con that has amazing people, and it's always a great experience. And I did The Shining there, and it was so much fun because you could completely focus not on the fact that there are ghosts, or that you're running away, or that the house is bleeding, and all of this stuff. You can focus on your character, what they want, and what's getting in the way of what they want. And so we actually had the psychotic, axe murderer character, and we had the rest of them trying to get away from it. And I think other games you would probably think of Savage Worlds or something might be able to run it, but you don't care about the chases. You care about the fear. And it really, really, really worked. And I think that one of the things I want to do with this framework is build out trappings into full-on settings to really explore how far this can go.
Do you think that people can tell stories in, any setting, like futuristic setting? Does it have to be America, I guess, is another good question.
Now, if you do it as raw, the reason it's Great American Novel is because there has to be some sort of context for the framework. I'm not putting out a Savage Worlds. It can be, it's comparable in a way because you can use it on any setting. But, this is geared for an experience that is character-driven, not plot-driven. And Great American Novel is a great place to start because many of those, if not all of them, are that way. When you think about Beloved or you think about, any of the Mark Twain books, it's really not a plot. It's a character story. So it was a great place to start. And all it means is that it needs to be literary, it needs to be authentically Americana, and it needs to be realistic. Those are the calling cards of a Great American Novel. But you can choose your own themes. That's the default setting. So if you sit down at your table, there's a whole machine in place for you to decide what your themes are, decide what you don't want included. There's some built-in safety mechanics. And then you can play out anything. You could play the Avengers. Let's face it, that's not really about their superpowers or even about the plot. It's about the character interactions and their motivations.
And in many ways is the Great American Novel of this current era, right?
Well, certainly on the Marvel side, yeah.
There's so much coolness you could have here. So how easy is this system to pick up and play?
I think I found that it's easier for people that haven't played traditional role-playing games because you don't really know what to expect. So if you come in expecting a particular game, it's surprising. I've had feedback from traditional role players that have said, when I sat down and you explained what we were going to do, I almost left the table.
Really?
Yeah. But I stayed, and I'm really glad I did because it is a huge departure from traditional games. It's also a departure from some of the more indie games that we're used to. It definitely has a Powered by the Apocalypse chassis, but
sure.
There's a lot of fate in there too, and there's some fiasco, and there's some. And after a while, it just looks like something completely incomprehensible. So I think if you're really good at games, you actually might need to sit back and kind of and take in the language of the book and really reorient yourself. But if you're not and you just follow the instructions, it just works. I think that us as gamers have a lot of our own. We almost gatekeep ourselves with game systems, and so you're always drawing parallels. Well, how does this work like that? How does it work like that? But you really need to kind of leave that at the door and come in with a fresh slate because it is a unique framework. It's an easy one, but it's unique.
There's something to be said for trying new games, especially because you can bring those mechanics into your home games, even if that's not what you're playing, right? It's great to mash up role-playing games. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, I have been accused of mashing up role-playing games before. So
that's what it's all about?
Yep.
That's what it's all about, So if people want to learn more about the game, where should they go and what should they do?
I think a good place to go is Christopher.world, which is my website, and it has it's out of date now, but I'll certainly have it up to date by the time people start coming to it. But that's where I keep track of everything. I'm very prolific when it comes to some of the sub social media platforms. Like I'm on a lot of the Slacks and the Discords out there, and I think the best place to find me is at Facebook. So I'm always posting about my stuff on Facebook. So if you seek me out there, I'll like you.
Nice. That's awesome. That's excellent. So definitely go check this out, everybody. This is going to be a lot of fun. You've got my money, Christopher, so hopefully that made it worth it coming on here. If people are interested in contacting you directly, is there any place they should go? Probably Christopher.world, right?
Yeah, Christopher.world, or seek me out on Twitter or on Facebook. I always try to get back to everybody. I love talking to people. I especially like talking about role-playing games.
Yeah, I do too. So hopefully you will come back and talk more about role-playing games with me, Christopher. I would love to have you on. This has been an awesome
love that.
Chat.
I can talk about anything for hours that has to do with role-playing games.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Thank you. This has been great.
That was a great conversation with Christopher. People should definitely go check out The Great American Novel, the RPG. It sounds really fun, really unique, and I'm sure we will have Christopher back on the show. Tabletop Babble is still a new show, and you can help us grow by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Even if you don't listen to the podcast through iTunes, odds are your podcatcher app uses iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts. So, head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. It's free to create an account. Leave a review for all the other podcasts you love. They will thank you. And if you leave us a 5-star review, I will read your review out loud and credit you. You can make me say whatever you want, like to Luthien, who left a review entitled "Great Podcast, a Lot of Substance." Luthien says, "This podcast is my favorite. The quality of guests is great, and the show is full of substance. The show also keeps pretty clean language, which means I can listen to it in the car with my daughter. Also, it sounds professionally produced. As a gamer who started in 2E who thought I had seen it all, I've been pleasantly surprised at the ideas presented in this show." Well, thank you, Luthien. That means a lot to me that you're listening to this show and that you are listening in the car with your daughter. Future generations of gamers matter. They keep the hobby going. Thank you so much. All right, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can find me online at worldbuilderblog.com. And don't forget to head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com to check out other awesome shows like The Demon Plague. It's a D&D 5th edition actual play podcast based on a level 1 through 20 adventure I wrote with John 4. And I am running the game. I've got great cast members. You're going to want to check this out. It's all over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press. Kobold Press are the makers of fine 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons gaming products such as the Tome of Beasts, the incredible Midgard campaign setting, and now Deep Magic for 5th edition D&D. Want to learn the secrets of elven magic, blast your enemies with battle magic, build cunning mechanical servants with clockwork magic? Of course you do. I want to do all of those things. That sounds amazing. The Deep Magic series from Kobold Press has all this and more for 5th edition. Time magic, rune magic, illumination, nearly 20 PDFs with new ones coming out all the time. In this series, you'll find new magic schools, sorceress origins, warlock patrons, feats, spells, magic items, and so much more. Best of all, each Deep Magic PDF is a deal. Most of them are $2.99. And it's a huge trove of content in every single PDF. Go check this out. Pick up Deep Magic for 5th edition over at koboldpress.com. You can pick the PDFs you want. It is a great series. It is one of the best things ever. So again, go check out Deep Magic for 5th edition at koboldpress.com.